So today being Gandhi Jayanti, 2nd October, I thought this should be a lovely theme in terms of, thinking about Mahatma Gandhi and how he created a movement and what are the different liberated interest principles we can see in what he did. It has been really amazing to put this together. I had not thought about this before. The idea came up, just like that. And so last whole week, I've been, reading up various aspects of Gandhiji and all of that research and so on. So it's been very, very entertaining, very interesting week for me, digging up into history and so on. So first question to ask ourselves is, this is what I'm going to talk about today, Mahatma Gandhi creating a liberating movement. So the first thing is to understand what got him going. Okay, so I think all of us are familiar with his story and so on. I think it might be a good discussion to just have, and then maybe I can share what I thought. So what got him, what is it that fundamentally got him going? And what was his golden vibe? So any thoughts from you in terms of what was the thing that really got him going?
Maybe the treatment he got in South Africa.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Racism.
Yeah, in fact, that is the most famous incident. Like after that, Gandhi was different. Before that, Gandhi was different type of a thing. Yeah. And any other thoughts? And what about it? We know the instance, but what was the golden vibe? Yeah. Yeah, Hiten, go ahead.
Yeah, I think he was quite a regular guy. I mean, from my point of view, he was a regular guy going about his business. And but when he faced discrimination, probably I think being thrown out of the train was the last straw. I mean, I think it was not just a one-off thing, but probably he faced the discrimination at the bar as well, at other places as well. And
yes,
that is what had and he saw the discrimination being meted out to brown-skinned people, so-called, and things like that. And so this was, I think, a trigger point when this happened. So that is what got him changed. And he kind of he was not a great orator. In fact, he's not somebody who was unlike Nehru perhaps, but he had this intrinsic quality. And the important thing is he developed this innate ability to do things himself before he would put it on to others. And I think that is what he realized. He tapped onto that golden vibe of his, of like-minded people who, and then turned it into a movement in South Africa.
Certainly. So, yeah, certainly, Hiten. So it was not one instance could have been the biggest trigger, but there were repeated instances happening like that, very similar instances happening. Yeah, Anil, you had something to share.
So what I found is interesting is first he wanted an eye for an eye, but then started thinking, will that solve the challenge? Will that solve the problem? And kept on thinking, and then maybe he found the non-cooperative movement as a thing. Is that maybe so he thought of something, how to get the result.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm disturbed, but then okay, I want result, and how I'll get that result, start moving in that direction.
Certainly. So he found the method on how to go about getting what he wanted. Yeah. Any other thoughts? What was his driver? Okay. So that instance, certainly, I mean, everywhere we get to listen to that instance and so on. So I was digging deeper. So I kind of started looking at all his, famous quotations. So what gives an inkling of his golden vibe, right? And I thought this one kind of captures it best in terms of what really mattered to him, right? I cannot conceive of a greater loss than the loss of one's self-respect. Okay, and if you go back to the South Africa train incident, it's the same thing, right? It was a loss of self-respect, and look at the choice of his words. He says, "I cannot conceive of a greater loss than the loss of one's self-respect." He's not talking about other types. There's so many different things that we can lose, right? We can lose a family member, we can lose money, we can lose a job, we can lose so many things. But he says this is the one thing that he believes is the greatest loss than the loss of one's self-respect. So I kind of zeroed in on this and said, okay, his golden vibe is around this. It's about self-respect, right? And if you kind of start thinking about, like Hiten was saying, different instances in his life, it was all about whether that self-respect was there or not, right? And so I kind of think that this is what his golden vibe was all about: self-respect, right? Because it was not about freedom, right? Because there was a time when he was fine with dominion status, like Canada or Australia and so on. That was fine. So it was not freedom, it was self-respect, right? And when he realized that even a dominion status wasn't actually giving Indians self-respect, that's when he said, quit India. So it's about self-respect rather than anything else. And then if you go deeper, the causes that he was associated with. So it was about self-respect for Dalits, self-respect, because if you look at that age, I think we forget how it used to be because of the kind of reforms that have happened over these 70 years, or even earlier during the freedom movement. So the kind of society that we were in was actually, what was it about? It was actually, getting someone to feel low so that they could have power, right? It was something like that. And across the board, whether it was British versus Indians, so they made a big shosha about how to create status between British versus non-British, between the British viceroys and the Maharajas of India. So the kind of status symbols, the kind of hierarchy, the kind of divisions, just to show that somebody else is not worthy. That is the kind of environment we were in. I mean, nowadays we still hear a little bit of caste and this and that, but those days, even if a higher caste person is walking down the road and there's a lower caste person, that person has to, step away from the road and salute give respect to the higher caste person, and all of those. There's so many barriers, right, in terms of, or so many ways to steal the self-respect from people. I think that was what was happening. Religions, so you kind of show other religions as inferior and, not this thing. Whites versus Indians that we saw in South Africa was a lot more prominent than in India, possibly. Hotels, restaurants saying that this is for whites and Indians and dogs are not allowed, things like that. Women's right in our society, the way we treated women, not across the board, but quite predominantly, that it was a male-dominated society. Widow remarriages was not allowed. The treatment given to and child marriages, right? 11, 13 years old girl would get married. And this, again, the thing about poor versus rich, that was the other thing, right? So in terms of the whole aspect of, in fact, even the Indian National Congress was considered to be a rich man's party till Gandhiji came along, right, and changed that altogether. So this whole thing about self-respect, I think all the causes that he was associated with, if you boil it down to one word, it's about self-respect for everyone, right? Everyone to feel self-respect. So I feel that I feel that is really the golden vibe from where he was coming from. Yeah, Hiten, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned about the self-respect part. I remember my first visit to Dubai sometime in '94, and I had a meeting at the Dubai Yacht Club. And outside there, I saw a board which made me really, really boil, because it was written there, dogs and mulberries not allowed. They had that. I mean, I felt I was seething with anger. At this guy, I said, "This is not a place. This is not something which we deserve."
Yeah.
And I can fully empathize with what someone would have felt at living in a.
Yeah. And the key thing over here is actually, when you're in that environment, it's quite easy to kind of accept things as it is, right? This is how things are. So what is new about this, right? But to kind of step away out of that environment or above that and go above that environment and say, hey, this is not correct. And if we want self-respect, we need to give self-respect to others as well. And coming from that angle, I think that's what made him such a iconic leader or impactful leader for all of us. Actually, I think the society that we live in today is way different from the society which was there before the freedom movement took place. So it was really about self-respect. So it was about social reform. It was about that. His message was about that, right? Starting from the small, simple things like, making sure that people were allowed to use community wells and, walk on the streets equally without any restrictions. So things like that to, so many simple things, right? Then to personal habits. So if you want self-respect, you want this thing. So the way he changed his own habits, right? Cleaning the toilets himself, for example. Why that? So that through his actions, he's showing self-respect for others and self-reliance. Because if you want self-respect, you cannot be dependent on the others. So you need to be reliant on yourself. And therefore, the whole thing about panchayats and so on, so that as a community, you're self-reliant, and self-rule, which came in much later, and satyagraha. So all of these movements, if you look at the root at it, it's really about self-respect, right? And I think when someone mentioned that if the British go away, what will happen to the country? It will kind of go to ruins. So you say it doesn't matter. At least it will be our rule. It won't be somebody else's rule, right? Something like that he mentioned during that time. So self-rule. So in fact, if you look at his journey transformation, right, from being a barrister, and he used to pride on wearing English clothes and so on and so forth, right? Because he was trying to fit in. And if you read his book, he talks about his early experiences in trying to fit in with when he went to London and so on. But then when he realized that it is really about self-respect, and how will a common person in the country relate with him if he's dressed like somebody else? So, adopting the clothes of the poorest in the country and living like that, that is how he gives self-respect to others. So key lesson over here again is, if one wants respect being what he wants as his golden vibe, you need to respect others. So that became, so again, I was kind of relating it to the golden vibe. What you want to give it to others, right? So that's essentially the essence that he practiced as well, right? What he wanted was respect, and he wanted to give it to everybody else. And the whole synchronicity of it, right? Happiness is when what you think, what you say, and what you do are in harmony. So we won't see too many conflicts in him, right? It's not that he was clear about everything from day one, right? There were several opinions that he changed, and he also grew out of the discussions, criticisms, and all that was happening around him. But he was prepared to do that, because for him, what was important was seeking the truth. And as he learned, as he grew, he also adapted to his own thinking. But there was congruence in terms of what he thought, what he said, and what he did. So, and the way he summed up his doctrine, right? My doctrine means that I must identify myself with life, with everything that lives, that I must share the majesty of life in the presence of God. The sum total of this life is God. So that was essentially the way he captured his, he calls it doctrine. So now, and we kind of learn, and this again related to golden vibe. So a man is but the product of his thoughts. What he thinks, he becomes, right? So I kind of modified it now. Okay. So a man is but the product of his feelings. What he feels, he becomes. Okay. So coming from the golden vibe angle. Okay. So this is my modification of Gandhi's quotation. So how did he create a movement? So in the manifestation workshop, we talk about creating a movement and the various stages of how this happens. And we just saw, so just let's kind of dive a little deeper into this and see what was happening. So we kind of understand that the energy was actually coming from respect. So we were in a society where people spent a lot of time and energy putting down other people, right? So that they could feel superior. So that was the kind of society we were in terms of hierarchy, in terms of status, in terms of exploiting others, and so on. So the energy really was about we need respect. Okay, so that was it. So that was energy. That was the calling which was there in that society, right? And which was with him as well. And what it needed was a catalyst with the same energy that we need respect, right? So we saw the two getting merged over here. And if you really think about it, even the British rule, right? British were able to rule India purely because we were fighting among ourselves. So I think it's very evident over there. And even, in fact, I was reading, in early British conquests and how the first few, the army that they had, the first army that they trained was consisting of, Andhra laborers, okay, who were not respected in their community by others, right? So they were the first set of people that they trained to become their soldiers. So it was essentially because of lack of respect that the British were able to rule the rest of, India, because we didn't respect each other. So, so that was what shall you say, the emotion which was energy that required to be addressed, and we had the catalyst in terms of Gandhiji. So, what was the ideology? So based on that energy, based on so ideology, if you think about it, Gandhiji, it was essentially truth and ahimsa. So what he talks about is, he says God is truth. Okay. The way to truth lies through ahimsa. So that was his pure, and I found this nice with his signature and so on. So that is what he says. God is truth. It's such a simple thing, right? And then he talks about satyagraha is a relentless search for truth and a determination to search truth. Okay, so his the way to kind of achieve respect became this in terms of searching for the truth, and then building on his ideology. What was the ideology about? I cannot teach you violence as I do not myself believe in it. I can only teach you not to bow your heads before anyone, even at the cost of your life. You can see that respect again getting resonated over there, right? So what is satyagraha all about? It's about not bowing your heads before anyone, and you're prepared to give your life for that, because respect is so important. So this is what satyagraha was about. It was about respecting yourself, actually, so then he talks about, Sarvodaya was this other ideology or principle. And what is that about? It's about, by Ram Rajya, he says, I do not mean Hindu Raj. For me, Ram and Rahim are one and the same deity. The ancient ideal of Ram Rajya is one of true democracy, in which the meanest citizen could be sure of swift justice. So that is so he essentially the concept of universal uplift or progress for all. So that was what Swarajya was about. Sarvodaya was about, that it is for everyone, is not for a few people. So amazing. So this was really his ideology: truth, ahimsa, satyagraha, and Sarvodaya. So then the next part of scaling up for a movement is really so how did he plant these ideologies? So he planted these ideologies through various movements that he got involved with. Everywhere it was coming from the same thing about respect, right? Everywhere it's about the same thing, but different flavors of it, different flavors of it. And I think he started with smaller, and the movements became bigger and bigger. But everywhere he created leaders, right? Created other people who could lead. And possibly this is where he trained people in terms of how to do this in his principles, right? So that is when he started creating circles. I think when he became active in the Indian National Congress, he traveled across the country and he set up regional centers, right, for INC. So INC started their in the provinces. They started their regional things, and those meetings were conducted in the regional languages. So that way, what happened was the circles got created. The same ideology getting spread across other people and who were local in nature. So that's how the circles got created, and that's the reason when the salt satyagraha happened, the movement was across the countries, because by that time there were people everywhere who were in a way aligned to what his teachings were, what his beliefs were, and there were local leaders who could guide people into what was happening. And then they had protocols in terms of satyagraha and so on. Simple protocol was that you don't become violent, right? And whenever the protocol was broken, even if everybody was in Josh and everybody was, and the movement was happening, even a single instance of violence, and he would stop the movement. I mean, he'll stop that particular movement and say, okay, fine, and to some extent, even going on fast, right? So that people, or he'll call off the movement as well if it was breaking the protocol, because the protocols are so important to uphold the ideology. So that's essentially, so each circle, you kind of inculcate those protocols, and that's how the scaling happened. And it's interesting that, so this is how you create a movement. Starts off with a energy, you have a catalyst, you articulate the ideology. And I think one of the ways he articulated the ideology was through his lectures, his own publications. He created he created 2 publications just to spread his thoughts, and writing books, and corresponding with so many leaders and having dialogues with them, and being addressing each and every criticism which was coming his way to clarify his ideology. It's very interesting. I was reading one book by Ramchandra Guha, where there's an article written by Gandhiji himself, where he talks about ahimsa and satyagraha, and to a reader. Okay, so there's a hypothetical conversation happening, and the reader is asking him questions like, can you give me even one instance where satyagraha has triumphed? Okay, because if you look at history, everywhere it's about battles and one king defeating another king. So can you show even one instance where satyagraha has worked? So then Gandhiji in that kind of answers it, saying that in fact he says satyagraha, or this and he calls it going from this platform of love, or this thing about it's going from love rather than from hate, right? So in fact that is more natural than hate. Love is more natural than hate, because if you look at history is the recording of exceptions. Okay, it's not the recording of the norm. Okay, and if so that's amazing the way he puts it, right? So then he says, if two brothers quarrel and the brothers go to court and there's a settlement or something like that, that becomes a newspaper, that comes in the newspaper as news. But however, if the two brothers reconcile and they talk to and they kind of hug each other, that doesn't become news, because that's the norm. So he says love is the norm, hate is not the norm, and that's the reason why history doesn't record this. And hate and wars are what the kings do. It's not what the common man does. So so satyagraha is a lot more in our nature than wars and hate. So amazing the way he kind of talks about or spreads his ideology and so on. And of course, because of all of that, the circles get created and the protocols are there, that this is how you run this movement. So good. So that was my learning in terms of how to see reflections of liberated press creators in what happened in Gandhiji's life and in our freedom movement.